Joining me now, Georgia Democrat and voting rights advocate Stacey Abrams. Leader Abrams, thanks for joining us. So Republican state lawmakers in your home state, Georgia, have introduced almost 24 bills to make it more difficult to vote. They are going to end no-excuse mail-in voting, which has been there since 2005. They're going to reduce voting on Sundays, ask for stricter ID requirements, take away drop boxes. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in D.C., he called this effort by Georgia Republicans, quote, racist, plain and simple, unquote. Do you agree? And is there any way for Democrats to stop these efforts?
Well, first of all, I do absolutely agree that it's racist. It is a redux of Jim Crow in a suit and tie. We know that the only thing that precipitated these changes, it's not that there was a question of security. In fact, the Secretary of State and the governor went to great pains to assure America that Georgia's elections were secure. And so the only connection that we can find is that more people of color voted, and it changed the outcome of elections in a direction that Republicans do not like. And so instead of celebrating better access and more participation, their response is to try to eliminate access to voting for primarily communities of color. And there's a direct correlation between the usage of drop boxes, the usage of in-person early voting, especially on Sundays, and the use of vote by mail, and a direct increase in the number of people of color voting.
And in fact, the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, a Republican, has said that he thinks it's Donald Trump insulting the process that led to so many Trump voters not turning out for the special elections, thus handing the U.S. Senate to the Democrats. We should point out, of course, it's not just in Georgia. Republicans in 43 states are pushing more than 250 pieces of legislation that would make it more difficult for individuals to vote. They say they're doing this for vote security. Arizona Republican State Representative John Kavanaugh told CNN, quote, there's a fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats value as many people as possible voting, and they're willing to risk fraud. Republicans are more concerned about fraud, so we don't mind putting security measures in that won't let everybody vote. But everybody shouldn't be voting, unquote. What's your reaction when you hear that from a Republican elected official?
Well, my reaction when I hear that from any American is that I'm fundamentally disappointed that they misunderstand our democracy. Our system of government demands active participation from citizens to direct the future of our nation. And we should be deeply disappointed in anyone, any American citizen, and certainly anyone who took the oath of office who seeks to restrict access to the right to vote and uses this false predicate of fraud, which we have seen disproven in multiple courts and by the Supreme Court, as well as by the governors and secretaries of state in almost every state. We know that voter fraud did not happen, but we know that voter participation did increase. And we should all be small d democratic in the sense that we should want as many people as possible who are eligible to have a voice in the direction of our nation. If we are willing to invest our dollars, we should be allowed to have a voice in our system. That was the fundamental premise of this nation. And that's why H.R. 1, S.R. 1, and H.R. 4 are such essential pieces of legislation. Because whether it's happening in Georgia, in Arizona, in Pennsylvania, in Kansas, in Iowa, where voter suppression is rearing its head yet again, it is our responsibility to ensure that no matter where you live in the United States of America, the right to vote and the access to that vote is protected.
We shouldn't say there's no fraud, there's no significant fraud, but there obviously has been some fraud here and there. I know of at least 2 or 3 Trump voters in Pennsylvania who voted for their dead parents. So there has been some fraud, just not anything that would change the course of the election. Are you worried if these laws happen that they could cost Democrats Senate races, gubernatorial races, even the White House in 2024?
I'm less concerned about the impact on Democrats and more concerned about the impact on Americans. When you tell Americans that their right to vote has to be determined by whether or not the party in power thinks that they should be heard, we are completely reversing our course, the progress we've made becoming a more democratic society. This is not about any individual politician. It's about the right of the people to be heard. We just watched the American Rescue Plan pass, where we're going to lift half of the people in poverty out of poverty. In the state of Georgia alone, 88% of Georgians and 88% of Georgia's children will receive funding, and we'll lift 171 1,000 children out of poverty. It should be anathema to us in the United States that we allow anyone to deny the right to vote to any American so we can choose the direction of this country.
The House just passed a sweeping voting reform bill. It's about to run into the Senate filibuster. House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn said it would be catastrophic if the filibuster was allowed to be used to block these efforts to ensure voting rights. What's your message to Democratic senators such as Kyrsten Sinema or Senator Joe Manchin, or even to President Biden, who all support voting rights, but have made clear that they're not in favor of eliminating the filibuster, which will all but guarantee this bill dies?
I don't believe that it's necessary to wholly eliminate the filibuster to accomplish the purposes of passing these bills. The Elections Clause in the Constitution guarantees that the Congress alone has the power to regulate the time, manner, and place of elections. That is a power that is sacrosanct. We are watching across this country as individual legislators try to use the big lie to restrict access to the right to vote. And just as we have seen an exemption carved into the filibuster rules for judicial appointments, for cabinet appointments, and for budget reconciliation, the protection of our democracy, especially in the wake of the insurrection on January 6th and its continued ripples throughout our state legislatures, it demands that the entire U.S. Senate acknowledge that protection of democracy is so fundamental that it should be exempt from the filibuster rules. And we encourage everyone to go to fairfight.com to learn more.
Lastly, before I let you go, I want to ask you, on Friday, the majority of Democrats in New York's congressional delegation, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, publicly called on Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo to resign because of the myriad scandals and sexual harassment allegations against him. As a high-profile voice in the Democratic Party, do you agree with them that Governor Cuomo needs to step down?
I believe that women should be heard, that any accusations of sexual misconduct should be investigated. But my focus right now is not wading into what's happening in New York. I believe New Yorkers will decide what they need to do, and I believe the women who have come forward should be heard and should be listened to. But my focus remains on protecting democracy in New York, in Georgia, and around this country, because the fundamentals of our democracy are at risk, and we cannot forget that just because the election's over, we know that the big lie continues, and it's reshaping our nation in ways that we should not countenance.
Stacey Abrams, thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.